Hello and welcome to this episode of Cloud Bytes Conversations, where we are extremely lucky to have Matt Meyers join us today. Matt is someone I've been trying to get on the podcast for ages. Matt has got, I think, the world's busiest travel schedule. We're talking at every event going out there. And we'll talk about why, because he's got one of the most interesting stories and a really interesting book that he's put out there and is sharing with people. So I'm really pleased that Matt is able to join us today. So welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Been looking forward to this very much so. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for finding the time to come and chat today. Because it's been a while since you and I first bumped into each other, just before you were launching the book, and then we met up in London's Calling, and so we've hung out a few times, but good to finally kind of get to sit down outside of a conference zone as well.
Yep, exactly. I think we first talked, it was sometime about right before the beginning of the summer, I think, if I remember right.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it all feels a bit of a blur, like life does. I don't know. It's
it's been a long summer for me. So
yeah, I mean, we for those watching on the video, you'll see that we have Cody sat next to Matt, and Matt and Cody, as I'm sure we'll discuss, have been everywhere. I don't think there's a continent or a corner of the planet you've not been to over the past kind of 6 to 9 months. So we can talk through all your various travels in a moment, as you have been around about getting lots of selfies. Just before we start, I want to just apologize in advance to anyone if there's any coughing, if my voice sounds a bit weak. I was down with COVID last week. It is still a thing. I'm back all okay now. And I'm testing negative and all fine, but my voice is still recovering. So apologies in advance if I don't sound as wonderful and melodic as I normally do so. But we'll make do. We will make do. So, Matt, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the Salesforce space?
Sure. It's actually a quite interesting story. So I actually got an interview when I graduated college, and I took a little bit longer. I was on the 10-year program for my degree for college. So just trying to explore the world first and before I went to college. But after I graduated, I ended up getting a job at a software company, and for a web developer position. Mm-hmm. And first day I start, my boss comes in my room and said, "Welcome to the team. You ever heard about this thing called Salesforce?" And I was like, "Nope." He's like, "Well, go to developer.force.com. You got a month." And I'm just like, "I'm going to get fired." And no mention of it during the interview at all. And then I just kind of started diving into it and started learning it. And then I really just started drinking the Kool-Aid and really didn't look back after that. And then I just started getting some certs and finally got my first job at a consulting company, was working for a large bank in San Antonio. Kind of got my legs wet as a consultant, and then got hired at Salesforce and just worked myself up the chain there, and really never looked back after that. So
that's really cool. So when you say you kind of you graduated and you got this job with this mythical thing called Salesforce that they didn't mention at all in the interview, what sort of year are we talking about then? Are we at 2012, 2013?
I think something like that, 2011. I know it is about 18 years or so that I've been in the ecosystem. So
18 years. So yeah, that's got to be 20, probably before that, 2003. 2006, 2007.
Yes, that's about right. About 6, 7, something like that. I mean, I basically was right. I think it was about a few years before Visualforce came out in Apex.
Oh wow!
Using S controls. So when I first came on, an interesting story just from my first job. So when I was actually a C# developer, and so what we did was we would have this ordering program. We needed to be a wizard that they could go through, but they needed to look and feel just like Salesforce. So I designed custom UI web components that you could drag onto the canvas in a C# ASP.NET page to look and feel exactly like Salesforce. Spent all this time modeling it out, making it look perfect, so you could make these wizards in Salesforce. And then here comes Visualforce. And Salesforce said, "Hey, we're going to become a platform. We're going to be a platform as the Salesforce platform." I was like, "How could Salesforce ever be a platform?" Lo and behold, then I decided to, little by little, started getting into it. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to scrap all the work I did, and I'll just use this Visualforce thing going forward. And of course, at that time, we didn't know much, and so we did all of our development in production. So I would
Yep.
not suggest that, but it was interesting, kind of getting started, seeing those early days. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the so I started about 2011 and was also a .NET developer that moved across. So I was working in what was the thing called? They had like a web forms system where you could like Silverlight. That was it.
Oh, I
Um,
remember that. Yeah.
which was really quite cool and powerful. And then like died on its backside because it was a bit too much like Flash. But like it was coming across to Salesforce and like doing it was yeah. And moving into kind of, I did a little bit of work with S controls, but then primarily Visual Force as it was out and about then. But yeah, it is a big jump. So, well, kudos to you for building like that full system in C Sharp because that would have been, I mean, that would have been fantastic to use. But then, as you say, like immediately Salesforce come in and replace things for you.
I think that's the kind of the notion of what typically happens in the ecosystem. As soon as you build one thing, they're already on the next thing. So you have to kind of try to stay a step ahead.
It's what like it is genuinely one of those things with Salesforce that like their pace of innovation is quite remarkable in the way that like you could sit on the outside of it and think, okay, great, like I'm going to build. You know, I was talking to someone the other day about like a Rails style framework for Salesforce, just to help you kind of knock together some of those kind of basic things and do things from the command line. But as soon as I think as soon as you got that first thing done, it'd be like redundant, and someone from Salesforce would have gone, "Oh, like here's a better way of doing it." They're very, very good at seeing what people's problems are, and kind of like with Visual Studio Code. I mean, the best thing that happened to something like Maven's Mate, I having worked on Maven's Mate and know the guys that built Maven's Mate, it was a great tool. But Salesforce are like, we can see you've got a problem. Let's solve that problem. But then did such a good job. Everyone was like, great, I don't need to do this anymore.
Yep, exactly. It is quite interesting, and it's like I mean I always try to wait at least like a couple years before something comes out in Salesforce. A lot of the time, just wait for it to be more baked, really, and get more adoption. Then you know that you can spend the time on it. So I actually have been waiting quite a while to learn all the Einstein stuff because I was like, well, it looks like it's evolving and all that. So last year at Dreamforce, not this year, but last year after Dreamforce, I was like, okay, I guess it's time to start learning all the Einstein AI stuff because it looks like they're finally done. Lo and behold, here comes Dreamforce this year with Agentforce.
Yeah.
Right after I'd already learned all the other stuff. Luckily, those blocks build on top of it, but still, it's like showing that even when it looks like something is done, you learn it. Now you have to relearn some other things. But I think it's just the nature of how Salesforce is and how fast they move. And I think sometimes things don't actually come out. I remember lots of times in the past years, or if you remember Touch, they talked about it a few years in a row, then it's gone. Or the SOS video chat and thing, but then some things do come out. So I think that's just the way you innovate. You have to experiment, you test the market, see how people react to it. If you don't get a big reaction or people, then you kind of sweep it under the rug a little bit. Then you work on the next thing until you finally find that thing that people like, and then you start doubling down on it and you start improving. And I think that's where all this AI stuff is going now with Salesforce. It seems like.
Yeah, it's you just something just popped in my mind that I may have, and I worry that I have dreamt this. So, like, you're here, Matt, to help either prove or disprove that I am dreaming or not dreaming about Salesforce products that never made it to market. But do I recall something that was like Salesforce Anywhere also, which was during
Yeah.
COVID, and they had like a screen where you're going to have like video chat on your Salesforce UI? And do you remember that, or was that just
Yeah,
me?
well, there was something. I don't know about the during COVID, but I remember they had the Salesforce SOS chat where they had the thing of like the technician that would go in and need to fix something. You go on your cell phone and it shows in Salesforce the video, and so you could do the support chat and all that. And then you saw that a couple years in a row, and then it never was shown again.
No, this was slightly different.
Yeah,
This was like I remember a really vivid. Yeah, do you know what? I found the video.
or
I'm
like a
going to
web
link
app
to the
in
video.
Salesforce.
Yeah, it's like an old 27th of June 2020 video, and um, on it, excuse me, on it there is it's like, hello to the expanded Salesforce neighborhood, which now includes all the features you love from Quip for Customer 360. So it's Quip and Salesforce kind of meshed in. And
Interesting.
there's a video chat. It was one of those things I was like, oh, this looks absolutely amazing. Like, I am in for this, and then never heard of it again.
Oh,
So
Quip. It's like it got a lot of hype, and then all of a sudden, I don't really know too many people that use Quip outside of Salesforce. I remember
yeah. If you're in
I went to
Salesforce, you're
AAE and they're
using.
trying to share a Quip doc, but then I'm like, okay, Quip's nice, but then you also have all the Google still and all this other stuff, and it's like just one other tool.
It's an interesting thing that despite the fact that there are so many alternatives out there now, that
Mm.
as soon as you start working with any business, you revert back to Microsoft.
Yep.
Like,
Unfortunately.
yeah, but like, I mean, as a business lock, because it's just incredible that, like, yeah, I've got my wife's company. They only use excuse me, they only use Google. But like, if someone sends them a document, they have to upload it into Google for Google to convert, and then when they want to send a new copy, they download it, and it's just like like, internally you can all collaborate and like you can share it with others, but like Microsoft have really somehow still like not, they've made it so people can't wean off of it, and I don't know whether it's just because enterprises are still largely Microsoft or
I
small
think so.
businesses, but
Enterprises use it, government uses it. I think it's just so ingrained in all the systems, and still so many people are still using PCs, even on Macs. You have it, and then they introduce Teams, and then Teams has. I think the thing is, like, it's the consolidation of tools. Like, I personally don't think Teams is that great, but you got Teams, you have their file sharing, which isn't that great, and there you have you consult, but you got everything in one place. I think that's the thing. Versus you have better tools that can do stuff like that. You've got like Slack, you have like Box, but then now you start having all these different tools, or Zoom also even that replaces some of that stuff. But now you have to get Zoom, you have to get Slack, you have to get Box for something that Teams does, and Teams is included in your license, all that stuff. So you're paying more money for all these other tools. And granted, I think they're better, but then also now you have to have different people to support them. So I think that's why Microsoft is getting that foothold, because they finally figured out that, hey, if we consolidate everything into one tool, and then connect Office to that tool, and then connect your phone system into that tool, and then that's your SharePoint too. Now they're going to get, it's going to be very sticky, and it is. And I think that's why everyone using it, because you got that all-in-one place tool, which I think someone needs to come out with something else that's like that same all-in-one tool, and then maybe people would start going away from that. Like if Slack would start having more true like a file store in there, I think that would be maybe one thing that would really help differentiate them or get them into that market. Versus right now, it's kind of like you can do files, but it's not really meant for your corporate file store like Microsoft does with the versioning, and that, as much as we all hate SharePoint, it's still useful in some ways like that. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's the other one that popped into my head then was all of the Azure DevOps stuff. Like, if you've ever used Azure DevOps, and there's an Azure DevOps code repository tool, which I'm like, you bought GitHub, like you bought the best like Git tool out there on the planet, and your option for enterprises is not to go, well, let's use an enterprise license and tie these together. It's let's do like, and it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so aside from sitting and talking about how awful we find some Microsoft products, you mentioned that so you started off, you got your feet wet in consulting and kind of learned a bit more about Salesforce at that point. But one of the things you mentioned was you joined Salesforce and became a program architect there in the public sector, I think, if I recall from my LinkedIn stalking correctly.
Yep.
So what is a program architect? What do they do? What's their role? What was it like? How did you find the entire experience of being at Salesforce?
Sure. Actually, I'll go back a little bit further. So after I got my job as a consultant, it was actually for this company called HCL. It was a Indian consulting company, and I was hired as a senior technical architect, which at that time I felt, if I look back, was more like a senior developer at that point. And then I come on to Salesforce for a technical architect role, and I go through the interview and everything. It's really good, and then they're talking about potentially moving forward. And I was like, well, I'm a senior technical architect right now. Shouldn't I be a senior technical architect at Salesforce? Had the guts to tell that to the interviewer, and they're like, well, our level of senior technical architects is a lot higher standard than some of the other SIs out there, is what they said. And so,
which is fair.
yeah, which it's fair. So I, of course, at the time I was young, and I thought, I was much higher level than I was, and that's when you actually learned that nothing is when you actually realize you know a lot. I think that's what kind of versus the reverse. But anyway, so I ended up landing as a technical architect, and I got put on one of the largest accounts at the time that Salesforce had landed, which was pretty much their largest account at the time. And so it was kind of trial by fire. It was really nice because I had this giant team there. I had around I think there was like 15 different architects there. So everyone on that whole team, because it was such a high profile project, got promoted while you were there. So I kind of started moving up through the ranks there from technical architect to senior technical architect. But the nice thing was, because we had so many people to learn from, I was able to gain a lot of information and learn pretty quickly. And then then we all moved off in our separate ways, and then started going on other accounts as a senior technical architect. Then the program architect program came out, and that was this whole different idea about that an architect could be more of a SKU versus a person. And I think that was their idea of that's how you get into services. Instead of selling it as a services offering, you're selling it as a product. And so that how they got them in there. And also, you were supposed to be elevated to a much higher level. You're supposed to be talking to the C levels. You were not just a project resource, you were a program resource, was the idea. I actually got sent to C-level training. So where they had this whole thing where you had all these C-level executives come in a room, and you were trying to discuss them, and they're teaching you how to talk to an executive. I remember a couple times some of the guys would like really dig into some of the people there that were there, and made one guy cry. I remember it was pretty brutal. But
wow.
I think that was excellent training just to understand, to think how to do that. And that helped elevate me in my career. And so I decided to end up going that program architect track, because I saw that was much different than I was doing before. I was at a higher level. I actually like business versus just the pure technical. I'm kind of like the mixture of it. So that was interesting to me. And that's really what I think appealed to me on that role, and being able to help at a much higher level and establishing entire programs instead of just at the technical level. Although it didn't always work that way. Sometimes you got put on a project and they kind of saw you as still didn't use you in the right way, and you were just a project resource, or you were still like they're having you do development. But a lot of the time I still would try to elevate myself, because I saw the role differently. I would try to figure out the lay of the land, try to figure out the relationships, and try to build myself in there so I could elevate myself. So even if you were at a lower level, you can always still elevate yourself in the organization. Even if you're in services now, or just whatever resource on a project, you have that ability if you find the right people, the right connections, and start getting yourself known more even at that organization. And then maybe you could help you get to connections that even your sales team can't get to. But either way, it was kind of interesting just growing there. And then eventually after being a program architect, I then was talking to, I saw a problem inside internally. They were just building out the federal program in Salesforce. They had a few program architects who really didn't have a really good management structure there, just because they didn't really, there were too many people that it was just a new department got put under another one. And then I was noticing a lot of people were going, like myself included, we were spending much more than I looked at the contracts, and our travel was costing much more than what was built into the contracts. And so I pitched to the person, the SVP who was running the organization at the time, that, hey, I see this problem. All these people are spending all this money, and the travel, and no one's really keeping eyes on it. And I see there's a lot of ways that we could, if we're keeping better eyes on that, we could actually reduce the spend there and actually make a little bit more money there. And so I was actually under just a director, and because I became a new role, I was given that new role. And so I reported directly to SVP at that time. That's a nice little jump there. And so I ended up being over the whole public sector side of things from a management, like I said, people manager perspective. And then eventually another guy came in, he was doing more of the technical management. So it was kind of like he was their guy, their leader to guide them over the projects they were on. I was more of looking at the business side of things, helping. I still help coach them, but less on their projects, but more on trying to understand like their travel, their spend, all that other kind of stuff. So I was moving into a little bit more of a business role, even though I was still technical. But myself, I was still on project myself, so I didn't get off of the project. I was still on my own project, doing all that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, one of the other things that was, I would say, one of the things I don't miss too much was at the time, but I think I could have done it a little bit differently, is Salesforce was very big about everyone contributing, being a contributor. And I think it depends on the time you have and what you're doing, but I'm on a full-time job. I also had the, managing people. Then they also want you to, because at that time I already got my CTA, and then they want you to be coaching CTAs. Then they also want you to be writing blogs, contributing. And it's like, okay, but you don't get your full-time job of doing the consulting for the customer didn't go less than 40 hours either. So it was kind of like, finding that balance. And so it was a lot of work, but that you were in a lot of pressure you were put on. So I think that would be one of the downsides of it, that kind of role, but also there was a lot of high visibility. So I think it just depends on where you want to go. I mean, if you want to get that visibility, you have to put the work in, I think, is really what it is. So what I did, I just think the last thing I'll say on this topic here is the way I got into this role and got the attention of that SVP was because I was just a technical architect. They saw me nothing as just a technical resource. That's it. At a project. So I later got my MBA, and I was really wanted to be seen as more than just a technical architect. So I put up a Google site internally at Salesforce that was my profile, and then I started writing blogs about business topics and how you could further your career for business topics. Then I'd mention all the senior executives and different people when I posted a blog about a business topic and showing out how people could further their career, do different things like that. So I started getting, I think, more visibility and elevating myself within the organization, because I wasn't just now this technical resource. They saw that I had other skills that they didn't know I had, and they wouldn't have known I had if I didn't do that. So
that's a really interesting story, and covers off some really kind of interesting different things that I'd like to kind of dig into a bit. So one of them that I think you articulated really well there is the different types of architect there are out there. And one of the bugbears I have in the Salesforce space is that everyone's an architect. We're all architects. And there was a time when I feel like there was a real pressure for everyone to try and go down the architect path. I don't think that there is that much anymore. But I think one of the things that people perhaps don't understand is that there is a role for an architect to be very technical and to sit there and to just go, I've got this big set of problems, go away and draw a diagram and help the problems get solved and figure out, how do I take data here and get it over here, and what's the process in between, and what are the timings, lots of UML diagrams and things like that. I think there's a solution architecture role where you are looking more sometimes at the holistic kind of business side of things, and it's far less technical, but more like, okay, how does the process fit together? What's some of the change management pieces around that? But I think above the pair of them, there is a role that I don't think I truly understood until I found myself doing it, which is kind of that program architect, or I often perhaps call it enterprise architect sort of role, where you are sat looking across a broad spectrum of things, talking to program managers and above, so CTOs, CEOs, CIOs, SVPs, whatever it might be, and helping them to understand that this is the series of technology choices that we have to make over here, and understand the technology. These are the business changes you need to make for it, and understanding that change management and people process. But I think the middle piece is bringing them both together to understand the business value, and that is often in kind of dollars and cents business value. There was one organization I worked with where, as a kind of an analogy, where I was brought in as a Salesforce architect, and there was an enterprise architect, and he was also the technical architect for the system that Salesforce was replacing. And so midway through, we just kind of he knew that I was going to kind of replace him, and I knew I was going to. And so he was really good though at sitting down with me and saying like, I don't think you understand what you need to be doing here. And he really helped guide me through that. And then at one point we kind of switched roles, and I was that because his product was doing less and mine was doing more. But one of the kind of pieces of advice he gave me is like, go away and look for like areas where you can help the business make money and improve. And we implemented one update where I had a conversation with their head of marketing, and they were spending like £2 million a year or something stupid on printing to send out mail. And I was like, and this was just around COVID, and I was like, why are we sending? Everyone's at home. Why are we sending paper that people are going to go stick in a rack? Like some people were still spraying their mail with like antibacterial spray and things like that. Like, no one wanted paper mail. Why don't we go more digital? That's what everything should be doing. And we managed to do a trial where we showed that we could save like $1.5 million a year.
Wow.
And that's good kind of stuff. But I think that program architect role you just kind of envisioned is kind of that same thing though, yeah, where you're really adding that extra value.
Yeah, you're kind of that mixture. I think with what I would call more of a business architect and the technical architect. I think for me, the way I look at it, a lot of things, and this is where a lot of technical people struggle with, is they go straight to code or straight to the technical architect expert. Versus what I typically do is I look at first what is the business problem you're trying to solve. Is this even do you even need to use the technology for it? Is this the right technology use for it? Why are you doing it? I mean, what's the reason behind it? How does it help the business? How does that improve the organization? So I think the two main things in business is really how do you decrease costs, or how do you make more money? So those are kind of the two. So what are you doing that's doing one of those two things? Right. And there may be things like, customer retention, which then goes to one of those topics, but typically it will always end in one of those two buckets. If it not going to end in one of those two buckets, then why are you doing it? Because you're not providing value to the business and the company. So I think that's kind of the lens I use, is starting from that business lens first, and then I move to the technical lens. And I think that's where really what that role is about, is really connecting with your executives, because the executives, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at your bottom line or your top line, right? They're not looking at what is the solution, what's the technology, what's Salesforce even doing here. It's more about what we can do to help move that needle for the business, move the company forward. And so if you can connect with them on that level, then you're going to have much better, much higher level conversations with them. And that, I think, is really what that program architect role was about.
That makes sense. Have you ever come across an organization that you didn't think it was worth helping? And what I mean by that is I've come across an organization once or twice in my time where I've gone in and had that conversation, and I've said to them, okay, like, well, what's that goal? What do you want to do? What are you trying to do? And they have this belief that Salesforce is going to magically fix things, which obviously it is, but but like they have this belief that Salesforce is going to magically fix things. But when you talk to them about the change that they will need to make, not just in terms of the IT system, but business process change, business change, things like that, they are not willing to make. And so I've actually had conversations before. I've said to people, well, look, you don't want to pay us, because all you're going to do is you're going to pay me £10,000, £20,000, £100,000 or whatever, and at the end of it, you're going to be in exactly the same spot because you've not changed your business, but you'll be £100,000 lighter. So have you ever experienced that or found that?
Oh yeah, many times. I think I think you're spot on there. So many organizations just think, hey, if we get this new shiny project, this new shiny thing, then it's going to fix all of our underlying problems. I mean, if you have problems, those problems are going to be there. You have to first, you have to clean your house first before you can start building new floors, right?
Oh yes.
Or adding on to it. So I've seen many organizations where they had broken processes and all these things, and then they build those broken processes in Salesforce against my recommendation, and their processes are still broken. And then they're saying, well, Salesforce doesn't work. Well, no, it's not because Salesforce doesn't work. It's because you've not thought deeper into what's the best practices you should be using for those processes. That's also why I'm a big fan also of well architected, where Salesforce decided, I think it's what 4 years now or something like that
Hmm.
that's been out. And the reason why they stood that whole program up was they noticed all these customers have implemented Salesforce in over 10, almost 20 years now for some, and it's like they've started to have tons of tech debt, tons of problems, and because they just went in there and started building things, and now um, they noticed more and more customers are starting having problems. People were starting to come to them, and they were getting some attrition. So then they just stood this up to help people step back and think about, okay, how are you designing this? Is this the right way to design it? Are you using best practices? Is it secure? Is it scalable? All that kind of stuff. And so I think that's kind of really where all that's coming in. And so I'm definitely, so that I've run that more times than I would like to admit, where people are just trying to use Salesforce to fix problems that are business problems. So fix those business problems first, then you can use Salesforce or whatever else technology that might be.
Yeah. I've had this conversation with people before where I've said that Salesforce's constant biggest risk is becoming the Microsoft Excel or the Microsoft Access of the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it is so easy to just, anyone, as long as like you're able to use a mouse and like, are comfortable enough with a keyboard, can go in and you can create an app, add some objects, start doing things, knock together a flow, do what you want, and voila, you've built your app. And truth be told, if you learn a few package commands, you can release it on the App Exchange as well, probably. But it is a real risk that we've got all of these. Even banking. I mean, banking systems terrify me because I've seen how many of them rely upon COBOL and CSV files being piped around places all the time still. Like the fact is that Salesforce could end up having this issue where you just get a problem of people having legacy stuff that is stuttering again.
Oh yeah, and then let's not even, or maybe we should dig into the whole security aspect of it, right? Imagine
Yeah.
how many holes they may have in their system because you didn't properly think about the design. How are you going to design that system? And now you start misconfiguring your Salesforce environment, and then you're starting to let open holes where people could steal your data. And I think that's also the scary thing about it. Like the more complicated your environment is, probably the less likely that you're going to be able to protect that data that's in there if you haven't really thought that through. So that's another thing that scares me, just in general, not even just Salesforce. How like especially these banks, and thinking about all the sensitive data that they're housing, and then they've got all these complex systems, and they really didn't think it through all the way, and then they keep stacking stuff on top of things on top of things, and then how much what data is accessible to people that shouldn't be getting that data internally and externally.
My first kind of professional paid programming job was when I was 18, so kind of early to mid noughties, and in that job, I was working on credit card processing systems, and it was in like related to a call center, and I was doing a lot of VBA work and access work, but was also partly there as just like IT support. Um, this organization, which is a very well known large organization in the UK, had a bunch of systems that were running in COBOL still, and they had a COBOL programmer who came in like every week for like a day or so, and other than smoking and drinking coffee, I wasn't sure what he was doing a lot of the time. But this was back in, I mean, if you imagine this is 25 years ago now, his day rate then was like £500-600 per day at the time. Like, I mean, the amount of money he must be making, like, if you wanted to do that same job now, you'd be looking at like thousands. But it was only there because they were too afraid to migrate it.
Yep.
There's just this guy that knew it. It's crazy,
Oh yeah,
absolutely
that's
crazy.
like one of my professors in college said he knew this guy who worked that was doing Fortran programming, and the way that guy kept his job was when you write program. That's back when you write your code and you use go-to lines, so you like jump to different lines in the code. So
Yeah,
he had one line, he wrote one line code, then he put go-to line 200,000, then from there go to line 250, then go to line this, and so only he knew how the code worked. So
that's devious, devious,
very.
devious. So the you mentioned whilst you were at Salesforce as well that you've got got CTA certified. So first of all, congratulations on that, because as someone who has taken and failed that review board, it is an absolute beast. And so anyone who gets through that deserves therapy and a hearty pat on the back. So describe the process of going through and becoming certified, what it was like for you, the good, the bad, the ugly, and sort of any advice you might have for people who are going through want to go through that same process.
Sure. For me, it was, I think, a bit different because I got mine in 2012, I believe, somewhere around there, or 14. So that was in the earlier days of the CTA, and there was no training or anything really available there. So that I started training for my CTA when I got that first Salesforce job I was talking about earlier that had about 15 different architects on there. So we were doing weekly CTA hours. So, and some of the people that were teaching me were the people that founded the program. So that was great. And so I think a lot of that was really neat to be able to learn from some of the founders. And it took me 2 years. The first year I failed. Second year I passed. I was actually glad I failed the first year because I just didn't feel like I deserved it. The second time I took it, I thought it actually was easy. So that was kind of the thing, just from the amount of studying I did and all of that. So I think that was kind of it was just I think it was also the mindset of not getting the CTA to get the CTA, but get the CTA to be able to validate your knowledge, that you got the knowledge, that you were ready for that next step in your career. And I would say I learned probably about 10 times at least that I knew prior to taking the CTA until I actually passed it. So I think failing sometimes is a good thing, whether it's CTA or anything else, because that means you're not ready, that you need to go back. It's a good signal telling you that you need to reassess, restudy, and get better. And then once you pass, you shouldn't be okay with just barely passing. You should be passing it with at least an A or higher. So even if I take a Salesforce exam and I get like a 68, I'm going to retake it because I wasn't ready yet. And so that's kind of things, for me in general, of just advice in general I would give for that. But for CTA, it's really about just, you're not going to be able to memorize stuff like a normal exam. You're going to conceptualize what you learn, right? Actually go get hands-on, inject yourself into things in your daily job, where you could learn things for your CTA, because that's really where the people that pass are people that have real hands-on knowledge. They're actually not just doing it out of a textbook. And the other part is just understanding your soft skills, the business side, to be able to tell a good story. I see a lot of really good technical people that fail the CTA, not because they didn't know the CTA material, but because they didn't know how to communicate that appropriately. And that's, I think, part of what we're talking about before, the business architect. The business architect knows how to communicate really well to their stakeholders. The technical architect can build the solutions, but may not necessarily know how to communicate. And I think you need both of those aspects in order to pass the CTA.
No, definitely. It's as an experience, it really does push you and test you. And I think that the importance of having those good communication skills cannot be understated, and is something we had Kia Bowden talk to us the other week again about his CTA journey, and he kind of highlighted the same things. It shows not just the technical knowledge; it is being able to comfortably discuss it and sort of be challenged, but be able to stand up to that challenge and communicate effectively why you did what you did.
Exactly. And something else I tell people too is the fact that being an architect or even a CTA, you don't need to know everything about everything. You just need to know what are the tools that you have in your tool belt and how to use them. I may not be a developer, and you don't need to be a developer to be a CTA, but you need to at least understand what's possible, when to use code, when to not. Just like you think about the architect of the house, do you think the architect of the house knows everything about plumbing pipes, about wiring wires? No, they don't, right? But they do know is that you need to have outlets here. You need to have permits. They need to be up to code. You need to have what parts, what pieces you should be using, right? And I think that's the thing about being an architect is like, I can't tell you I know everything about everything, especially with all the stuff Salesforce is coming out now. I just actually started really digging into Data Cloud last weekend. And so I could understand what are the tools I need available, what are the good times use cases for it. And I think that's really what it's about, is just understanding those concepts and what's available to use it, even if you don't know it to the nth level degree, because that's why you have other developers for other architects. And that's when you don't know it, then you say, okay, this is somewhere I need to dig into a little more. Hey, customer, I'm going to, I don't know the answer, but I can find that out. I know generally this is probably a good way to go. Let me do some research. I'll come back and let you know. And that's what being an architect's really about.
Yeah, that and that kind of ties in nicely to your other point about like making mistakes, because I think people forget that when you say like, oh, failure is an important part and making mistakes is an important part, a lot of people I think are afraid of that. And part of that is I don't think people understand how often they'll make mistakes in their normal life just by doing things. If the first time you open up a Salesforce org and try doing things, like, it might not feel like you're making mistakes, but you're finding things in the menu. You're clicking around, you're searching. It's like, oh, where's that kept? How do I do that? Oh, what do I do? I was, before we came on this call, I was adding a feature to my product. I was testing it, and it was erroring, and I need to go away and fix the error. But like, that's a mistake. That's okay. That's like part of the process. It doesn't need to be perfect. And it's the same if you were like, I'm learning Spanish in an evening class. Like I'm the first person to offer to talk, to do anything, because I'm happy, doing very bad Spanish because I'm paying the teacher to help fix that. Like, that's the entire point of the class. Like, being quiet and just hoping that I'm going to learn through osmosis isn't going to get there. So, that sort of everyday life of things is such an important part that I think people forget.
I think what they say is like, first you learn more from your failures than you do your successes. But also on the same note is doing the same thing over and over again in the exact same way and expecting different results is the definition of true insanity, right? So I think that's kind of the thing is, so when you see you had a mistake, then that's where you go out and fix that mistake and you learn from that mistake.
Yeah, definitely a big thing. Big part of it is that. So that's a really interesting set of kind of ideas and advice for those who might consider looking at, not just the CTA, but in general, getting more Salesforce certificates. I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. One of the things that we've mentioned and kind of nudged on a few times, like getting nearer and nearer to, which we can dive on into as well, and hopefully is an area that people don't make as many mistakes in, is security on Salesforce. Because so you work for those who are watching along, you can see that Cody has a lovely Easy Protect hoodie on, which I'm assuming is a custom made one. I not one that you just had in that size going already. It was a
Yep. Yeah, it's a custom made. We were trying to have something similar to the Trailblazer hoodie, and he's got a beautiful little smiley face on the back because to help protect your Salesforce security. So
very nice. So tell us a little bit about Easy Protect, and then we'll start talking a little bit about Salesforce security more generally. But for those who aren't familiar with Easy Protect, just give us an overview of the product.
Sure. So what I am the managing partner / founder CEO of Easy Protect, and what we do is we help customers protect customers from viruses in Salesforce. Because I think one thing that we found that is that most people don't really understand what a virus can do. And the truth is, viruses help attackers steal your data. And so that's kind of what we do is we focus on helping customers protect their data in Salesforce, whether it's from viruses or just from other types of misconfigurations and things. So it's really about educating people in Salesforce on what you should be understanding or thinking about to keeping your data safe.
Okay. And so before we started recording, and and just as we've gone through, you've mentioned a couple of times, we've discussed before, and we mentioned a couple of times here already about certain things that can cause problems with Salesforce security. So, what are some examples that people might be aware of, or might not be aware of, even of like common things that cause like security problems that aren't difficult to fix, but are often found.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to say was a quote that one of my good friends, I think you know him too, Steve Simpson, told me one time is the day Salesforce becomes insecure is the day you start configuring it, which is unfortunately very true. So I think you have to just be very intentional on what you're doing in Salesforce and just thinking about it, because there's so many things that you can be doing in Salesforce that could cause security gaps. And I think one of that is just making sure you're not over configuring Salesforce, because if you have too many moving parts, too many things that you need to consider, then it's going to be too easy to click that one switch that's going to cause a security issue. Like one example would be maybe you're, as a developer, you think, you're using Apex to create sharing rules on records. And then when a certain field is set on the record, you click save, all of a sudden it's shared with somebody else. Do you think the end user knows that code's running behind the scenes, sharing that record automatically? And that could actually inadvertently introduce a security risk. So it's really, as a developer, you have to, not saying you don't do that, but you need to make sure that it is apparent to the users if something's being shared, or you are making it in a way so that they understand that what those ramifications are. You have a way to have those checks and balances so that the data would not be shared with somebody that they inadvertently. Other things are like what I focus on with, and let's put it here in my book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, which is a story about how a customer of mine got hacked in Salesforce from their digital experience because it was misconfigured. And so, like with your guest user, you want to make sure that you're not sharing data that you don't want the whole world to see. Salesforce has locked down a lot of stuff that I talk about in the book, what they've done, but there's still things you could do. Like you can share records read-only to the guest user. Well, what people also don't know is all the Lightning APIs that power Lightning. Also, you can query data, you can update data, you can delete data if you have access to it. So as a guest user, if you have access to read a certain object, and then you also have access to an Apex class that's also exposed to delete records, you could take all those IDs from those records you can see, pass it to delete it. Or even worse, you could execute some Apex that could retrieve data you shouldn't see. Or even if you are sharing records, maybe sent with sensitive information, just because it's not on the UI, you couldn't see it. You could still see it. And then there's other things I think about is like even authenticated users are more dangerous because they have more access from a licensing perspective. A lot of people don't think about licensing also has security implications because you can do more with certain licenses. There's actually a metric out there that says your internal users are your highest risk users to your organization, not because maybe they're going to be malicious, but they have more access than your external users. So if their accounts become compromised, then you truly have an issue internally versus in your organization. Or maybe they are malicious. Maybe someone's not happy with their job and they're going to get fired. Well, then they really can do stuff. So that's kind of just thinking about being cognizant about who's using your application, what they can do, what will that do, what implications down the line does that have if you're making this setting or this configuration in Salesforce. It might seem simple right now, but in the future, it could have very large ramifications.
No, it's a really, really good synopsis of how mind-blowingly scary it can be, like just making simple configurations. One of the when you mentioned Apex managed sharing, there are two things on the platform. I'm trying to think if there's a third one. Oh, there we go, balloons, because Apple has its reactions there. That's a little Easter egg for anyone who watches. There are two things that if I ever find myself having to do them, I take it. Three things I can think of actually. If I ever find myself having to do them, I immediately stop what I'm doing and force myself to walk away from the keyboard for half an hour to think about it. One of them is Apex Managed Sharing. If I'm ever at the point where I'm like, I need to use Apex Managed Sharing, I'm like, well, I have done something wrong here. Like almost 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100, I can go away and have a think about it and come back and go, I was a moron. Let's do this differently.
Yep.
If I'm ever finding myself wanting to use sealed data in an Apex test class, again, I've done something wrong. I'm stupid. Walk away and do that again. The third one is if I ever find myself wanting to do a roll-up summary on a lookup relationship. If I ever am doing that, I know I've misunderstood the data model. If you're doing a roll-up summary on a lookup relationship, you have done something wrong, and you are going to break your sharing model one way or another.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, definitely. I feel like those kinds of things are those last resort tools in your tool belt in Salesforce.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they have all these different layers to get to your manual sharing or Apex sharing. It's same thing with several others, but I think that's kind of why I'm like, if I get to that point, I have to really think about it. Same thing like you said, like view all data, or I mean, without sharing, even, if there's certain things like that, I'm like, okay, am I thinking about this the right way? Something else also on that same note, just from that level, is something else people don't really think about is when you're creating your methods, your Apex methods in digital experiences, especially if you're using still Aura components and not LWC. So Salesforce used to teach us that, hey, we need to put all of our classes together based on business function. Well, the problem with that is in Lightning, if you're making those methods Aura exposed, anybody that you've shared that class with, they can get to any method in that entire class. It's not restrictive by method. It's once you share that class, any method that's been exposed, you can get to and use. So what really people should be thinking about is creating your methods by security persona, not business persona. Saying, okay, only these methods in this class should be executable by this role. So I'm going to put these together versus the others, even though they're related by business function, is going to go in a different class because that's a whole different role and different security persona that's going to use that. And that's really where you should start. I'm really big on personas. Just like in marketing, you have your personas. You should have personas when you're building designs. So you come up with, you have your actors, but also you have your regular personas of people using the system. But then I also go to another level thinking about this, what's the security personas? Because you may have someone that's like a sales user who's using your application, but no one really thinks about creating requirements for the cyber criminal that's going to try to get to your data. I don't think I've ever seen a project where there's requirements for the cyber criminal, but there should be, right?
Yeah.
Because they're still a user of your system. They're not an intended user, but they are a user, right? So you should be thinking about them. So
that's a really interesting way of doing of thinking about it, and I think one of the things that I find quite challenging now with Salesforce security is making those correct decisions against business requirements given some of the newer tools. So we're not going to talk about Agentforce because I'm done with Agentforce. Like, I'm not done with Agentforce, but like I've heard too much about Agentforce. So let's talk about a more kind of like normal piece at the moment, because with agents and AI, there's this whole trust layer thing, and we can get into spurious areas there. Let's just talk about like standard bots. Okay. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Salesforce Einstein bots, they have the word Einstein in them. You can make a bot that has zero AI capabilities in it. It's just a menu going through. And the recommendation from Salesforce is that your bot has a custom user with security permissions set for that custom user, an internal user rather than a bot user. Now, the interesting thing is that bot is still more than likely to be acting, for want of a phrase, on a public page as a guest user, because a lot of queries that come in are going to be, and a lot of use cases you want to use are things like orders. So, I've ordered a new computer, a new laptop, and it hasn't arrived yet. I'm going to go onto Apple's website and I'm going to message them and say, hi, I want to see what's the status of order ABC123. Now, the way that you would normally think about doing this is you go in and you go, okay, great. You have the form, you capture first name, last name, email address, You go through the details of saying what's the thing. But you are then letting that bot query every contact in the organization because they need to be able to see every contact. Here's another reaction. They need to be able to. I'll turn those off the next time. They need to be able to see every contact in the organization. They need to be able to see every account, therefore, to be able to see every contact in most situations. They'll need to be able to see every case related to every contact. They'll need to be able to create. They'll need to, and like, it's just as soon as you start thinking about it, you're like, this is madness. How much, like, every order that they could possibly see is on there. So and I think this is just a really interesting example of how quickly you can go from, okay, I've captured Paul's first name and last name and email, and I need to find him. How do I find Paul? Oh wait, I need to have the ability to see all the data that there is about Paul.
Yep. And actually, it's funny if I mean going back to a little bit back to Einstein, but I completed my Einstein Associate cert about a month or two ago, and it was actually very insightful because it was most of it was about ethics and trust and thinking about that whether it's an Einstein bot or just a standard bot, people don't think about what those bots can access. I mean, think about, okay, when you send data to query for that bot, what data does it have access to? And even worse, when it's returning responses, what data does it return? Will it accidentally return something that someone shouldn't see? Because it can see everything. Is it going to return something someone else can't see? So for example, if you have simple order numbers, hey, hi, I'm trying to inquire about my order 123, and then then someone says, well, what if I did 124, 125? And then it just returns that. You should have other information that they should know, not just the order number, because the order numbers are typically sequential. Said, okay, maybe put what's your order number, what's your name on the order, and the email, for example, or last four of your credit card, or something like that. And I think that's the kind of thing you need to put more security around these things, so people can't just put the right responses in or questions, and then it's returning data that you shouldn't be seeing. And the same thing for updating data. What if you updated someone else's record? What if you did something else? You changed what if you could, hey, I'm calling because my email changed. Can you change my email for this order? And then, or for my account? And then they change the email, then I can log into someone else's account, because then I change the password and all that. So I think there's a lot of things you got to think about on both the getting data back from these automated bots and agents and whatnot, and then what kind of data you allow them to update and change as well, that's publicly, or even if I'm authenticated, could I still get to other people's stuff I shouldn't be? Could I guess some certain things? And so I think those are things that you should really be thinking about when you're using these bots.
Do you think that there's and this is not a loaded question, this is a genuine query now, do you think that there's a difference or benefit to using either Apex versus Flow in bots or not? Because in the one hand, and the only reason this is not to get into an Apex versus Flow like huge debate here, but I feel that sometimes Apex is better for these things because you have that deliberate thought process, and you have to. I always feel with Apex, when you're writing a query, the fact you have to type out exactly what field you want to get to return, as an example, means that you are less likely to return everything. Whereas in Flow, I'm pretty sure the default is return all fields. And I would argue that most people don't sit there and go, let's manually decide what fields I'm getting all the time.
Yeah, I actually found that interesting because several weeks back I did a Flow security LinkedIn Live on Salesforce Ben with Shobi from the well-architected team. We were talking exactly about that, security and Flow. And I think Apex, you have to be more deliberate on some of the things that you do that open things up, versus Flow will default stuff. So one of the things Shobi did mention was that when you're doing getting a record back from Flow, you should make sure that you're only selecting the fields you need. Don't just take the default of all fields selected, because everything in Flow is coming back to the front end. And so then some of that stuff could be manipulated. You might send back data people shouldn't see and do certain things. So when you're thinking about Flow, you should be still thinking about the security. And I think that's a danger with Flow, is people really, for some reason, because it's so easy, maybe you don't really think about the security like you do in Apex when you're developing the code. So I think in a lot of ways, Apex could be safer. I think there's some things you can do that's not safe.
Sure.
But also flow. I think I like using flow as your driver and Apex doing the heavy lifting. And I think that gets you the best of both worlds. But still, you have to be careful in both systems when you're using them. And also in flows, same thing, like not running it in system mode, just like you wouldn't run Apex, or you shouldn't be, without sharing. So I think there's a number of things that way.
Shouldn't be. I mean, it's everything is just coded live into production and then run without sharing. I don't see the issues. Make it all global, and that's nice and easy for everyone to get access to.
Definitely. Anyway.
So yeah, so cool. And one of the things that you mentioned was the book. I've done a review of this book. I'll put a link to the review in the show notes. This is one of the best books that I have read. So congratulations, well done on writing such a good book. One of the things that I really liked about it is, so I have a pile of books on my desk for the Salesforce books I'm reviewing. I will not show the mess that is my desk. But one of the things I really liked about this is that it was concise. Far too many books, my own included, have far too many words in them often, and I really loved the conciseness of this as well. So tell us, can you share a little bit about why you started writing the book, how you got into writing the book? Because I know you've told me the story before, but for the listener or a watcher at home.
Yep, sure. So really, I mean, I think a mutual friend of ours, Ian Gotts, he had told me I need to write a book, because actually it started out as a less a little bit more selfish reason, where he said if you get a book, then people start think you're important for some reason. And so then I was trying to find a reason to write a book. And then what happened was I was on a project, and one of my customers got an email that a ethical hacker had retrieved more than 5,000 case records with private information in it. So I was like, wow, that seems like an interesting topic to start writing. So when my son was born, after the first month, I decided to write a book, because that's what you do when you have a baby, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But then after I wrote that, I started also at the same time presenting at conferences and asking people questions about it. And I realized this is actually a really big problem. Nobody knew about this. No one understood about it. And and so I actually turned to more of from just a little bit of a selfish reason of writing a book to more of I really need to get this information out there in people's hands. I need to help educate them that this is something they should be thinking about. And it's amazing, the more I talk to people, still how many people don't understand the risks of what you should be thinking about in Salesforce. So starting from writing a book about how what you should be thinking about for your digital experiences, and because of the story where a customer was had their data stolen, but to now of more of an overall book about helping what you should be thinking about to keep your data safe in Salesforce. So the thing I really wanted to do about the book, though, also was I wanted to make it for everybody, because you have all these books that are really technical, and it's hard to really understand the content sometimes. And then you have also the technical people who get bored with if it's too low level. So I really wanted to make it a book for everyone. So I just wanted to make it just giving my story, what happened to me. And so it's a very personal story about that. And that's kind of going through the day, how it happened, what I learned from it, what we did. And then I go into a little bit more meaty stuff so that the technical people don't get bored as well. So I really, feel very passionate about this and getting the word out.
It is a great book, and it's really well done. And that story aspect you mentioned, those who have watched any of my book reviews know that I kind of weirdly obsess about the narrative flow of kind of books, in particular technical books, because if you want just a list of if all you want from your technical book is a list of these are the methods and this is what to do, or step by step, you don't want a book. What you want is a task list, and that's not exciting for anyone. Oh, bye, Cody.
I want Cody. I need to go pick him up. So okay, sorry.
Right. Cody going for a walk. But I love the fact, I really enjoyed the way it was put together as that kind of narration through your day and the steps that you took. And thought that was really, really well done as well. So it's a really good book. And one of the nice things I think about it as well is you are donating the proceeds to good causes. So for those who are watching, now that Cody is back on the chair, you can see he has a very nice bow tie on. And that was a bow tie that I think you were wearing at an event for one of the groups that you donated the proceeds to.
Actually, it was a little bit different story. And apologies, I need to put my laptop in really quick so it doesn't die here. But we went to an event in London. It was a gala giving back. It was giving for a nonprofit that supports the LGBTQ community and educating children in schools about how to make it through that transition, understand and also people to understand so they're not teased as much and things like that. And so what we did was to support it, we bought this bow tie, and we were actually playing a game there for people pin the bow or tie the bow tie on Cody.
Oh, nice.
And so actually, funny enough, the only person that could tie the bow tie on Cody was the drag queen. So that was quite interesting. So it was a really fun game that we were doing there. So, but in the end, it was I really got passionate about that event. I thought it was really interesting. So I ended up giving 40 books away to one of the Salesforce employees who then distributed the books around Salesforce and had people buy them, and then Salesforce matched them and gave it all to that organization. And really, that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to do with the book, is I want to use the proceeds for good for the book. So right now, anything we're selling directly, we're just putting into a fund. Or also looking for other causes where we can just donate some books to help their causes.
Perfect. That's a fantastic way of giving back to the community more broadly. So what we'll do as well is I'm making a note. So people, there is a link to where you can get the book that should be hopefully displayed now somewhere, but also will be in the show notes. So it'll be the best link for Matt to get the best bang for buck for him, as well as I know that different I know from my own experience with my books that different sellers give you different levels of pieces and income and commission from it. But I'd really, really recommend that everyone, if you're working with digital experiences, definitely go out and buy it. If you're just working with Salesforce, honestly, it's a very good kind of book tale and just covers things off brilliantly. So definitely worth going through. And one of the things that I think has come out of that is you are now working with the Low Code Security Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who are regular listeners or viewers, we had Gaurav Ketapal on recently, who is another member of the Alliance. But for those who aren't familiar with the Alliance, give us a breakdown of what the Alliance does, what its aims are, and how you got involved.
Yeah, sure. So actually, it was I was approached by one of the founders of the Alliance back in, I think, in London or something, one of the shows over there, talking about how they found that there's this big problem where people really didn't understand or think about when they're configuring Salesforce. So it was very in line with my book about making sure people are more educated about what they should be doing to protect their data in Salesforce. So they wanted to they were trying to gather all these people together and wanted to start producing a number of different assets. And the first asset we produced was a 42-page white paper all about I forget the exact title, but it's the misconceptions of security in Salesforce or something like that, talking about shared responsibility in Salesforce, what shared responsibility is, what does that mean? There is a reason why it's called shared responsibility, because part of it is on you, part of it is on Salesforce, where a lot of people hear Salesforce trust, and then they say, oh, Salesforce is safe. Well, it is until, like I said, the day you start configuring it. And so those are the kind of the things that we're talking about. And if you want to get a sneak peek of my book, a lot of my content, or a little bit of my content, is in that paper as well. And the paper is free online for anyone that wants to download it. So.
Yeah, I'll put a link to the paper in the show notes. The paper is called Securing Salesforce: Hard Truths About Shared Responsibility. It is a really good white paper. It's fantastic. It's free. It's not even behind an email wall or anything like that. It is just completely free and open. So we'll include a link to it in the show notes. And for those watching along, you'll have seen a link on screen, or it'll be in the description below as well. So it's a fantastic initiative, that as well. So you obviously got the book out. You've got easy protect. I'm going to avoid putting my fingers up and getting yet another Apple reaction. So you've got the book out, you've got the Low Code Security Alliance, you've got Easy Protect, and the product that you're working on. So is there anything else that is on there for Matt, or is what's next for you? Is it just continuing to fight the good fight with these?
Yeah, pretty much. I think right now, just doing some more shows. I've been doing a lot of shows. Like I just recently got accepted to talk at Dubai Dreaming, so I'm kind of excited. Never been to Dubai, so that'll be fun. And then after that, going to French Touch Dreaming, and then maybe I'll finally get to take a rest from all the traveling that I've been doing.
Yeah,
After that,
how many events have you done since? I mean, was London's Calling your first one, or was that like did that kick it off, or was that?
that was already down the path. I think we started the event back in, was it March or something? We started over in Philly at Mid Atlantic Dreaming, then crossed the pond over to Prague for Czech Dreaming. Then from there did Wursten Ohana, which was the very first German show in Germany, along with Architect Dreaming, which is the European show purely for architects, very small format, which is really specialized for if you're an architect, you should do that. Then from there, I went over to London for the gala, and then I think I went back and started just doing some little bit of traveling, taking the train straight from all the way from Berlin, making my way all the way down to Rome with my wife and my son, and just kind of saw a bunch of castles and some interesting things along the way. And then also at the same time during that trip, I believe I went then over to France for a little bit, and then popped up to Paris, saw the setup for the Olympics, then went to London's Calling after that there. And then from there, went back to the US. And that was about 5 months or so, I think, of straight traveling out that I'd been out of the US.
Yeah.
And then I recently went, then I think I went to Dreamforce after that. Then after Dreamforce, just went to the life sciences dreaming, which is actually a very interesting one as well. That was in Philly, the only Salesforce show that's dedicated to the life sciences industry.
Oh, cool.
And so now, as I mentioned, then now Dubai and Paris are my next stops again. So it's been quite a journey. But everywhere I go, I take Cody along with me. He's been in many different cities, and take interesting shots. Like he helped keep the Tower of Pisa from falling over. That was one of interesting one. And he went to Rome with me. Went to all the shows. I think it's been really fun trip.
Are you going to do a collage video at the end of the year of all of your travel with Cody over 2024?
I've been talking about that with Kevin, who he's been we've been talking that over about getting all the Cody pictures together, where Cody's been having kind of like a memory scrapbook or something like that. So it's been a lot of places.
That's cool. That's very cool. So, so the thing that we ask every attendee to wrap up the show is if they have a specific tip or piece of advice that they would like to share with those listening or watching along at home. And I think we've covered a lot of stuff today around putting. We didn't even get into talking about your time as a program architect and how you were saying about putting yourself out there and doing more to get recognized, and how to learn via remembering to fail, and being able to accept those failures and use them to really help you kind of continue growing. We've talked obviously about security and taking your time around that, and thinking through that. So there's a ton of tips and bits of advice you've already given throughout. Is there a particular tip or piece of advice you'd like to share with the listener that would help them?
Yeah, sure. So I think I would focus more on the personal development side, because I think especially for a lot of the technical audience out there, that's something they struggle with a lot. I would say don't be afraid to be your authentic self. Especially when even in the workplace, just be yourself. Don't be afraid to tell people you don't know the answer. Don't be afraid to tell people no. There's a lot of ways that you can do that in a much better way, and then you'll get more respect that way in the long run. And as long as you, of course, can get to the right answer and show that you help them, and also make sure that make sure people know the work that you do. So many times people do work in closed rooms or closets, and the people that are making those decisions that affect your career never know about them, which is why I would put that blog out or that site out of myself, so I could catalog all the things I've done, and basically having my own personal brand site. And that's something I would encourage everyone to do in the organization, because not only are you saying, each thing that you're pushing out there, you can post a link back to it, but when they see it, they can see all of the other things you posted, all your accomplishments. So they really start to understand what have you done to help the organization. And then that really helps elevate you in those things. And the last thing I'll say is, like, don't discount the soft skills. The soft skills are just as important as the technical skills. And if you struggle with those soft skills, then go to take. There's a lot of meetup groups and things like that. So you can was the Toastmasters, I think, is one where you can help build your skills with other people. I mean, I think that's something that everyone still needs to focus on those soft skills. And so that's kind of best advice I can give someone.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming along and talking to us today and having a fantastic conversation. As always, whenever I talk to you, I learn a ton anyway. So I've really, really enjoyed today. It's been great seeing you and Cody again. And yeah, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you so much again. It was a pleasure. I look forward to the next time that we can see each other.
No, definitely. I'm hoping it won't be too long away. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cloud Bytes Conversations. Remember, if you have, to share, and subscribe with all of your friends, or colleagues, or people you might think will find it interesting. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening.